The Luna cursed the servant for looking at her mate, until the servant's blood broke the kingdom's curse. The grand ballroom of the Ashford estate shimmered under the glow of crystal chandeliers, each droplet catching the light and scattering it across polished marble floors. Eleanor Hayes stood in the corner, her hands clasped tightly around a silver tray as she watched the evening's festivities unfold before her. She had worked at the estate for nearly 3 years now, maintaining a careful invisibility that kept her employed and out of trouble. Tonight was different, though. Tonight, the Luna herself had arrived with her mate, and the entire household staff had been warned to avert their eyes and keep their distance. Eleanor had never quite understood the social hierarchy that governed the werewolf communities scattered throughout the northeastern United States. As a human servant, she existed on the periphery of their world, privy to its customs, but never truly part of it. The Ashfords were one of the oldest families in Massachusetts, their lineage traced back to the original settlers who had established these territories centuries ago. Their estate sprawled across hundreds of acres of carefully manicured land, a testament to generations of accumulated wealth and power. Eleanor's own story was far simpler, a girl from a broken home in Providence, Rhode Island, who had taken whatever work she could find to survive. The Luna, Vivian Ashford, moved through the crowd with practiced grace. Her auburn hair was pulled back in an elegant twist, revealing a long neck adorned with diamonds that probably cost more than Eleanor would earn in a lifetime. Beside her walked her mate Marcus Thornhill, a man whose presence commanded attention without effort. He was tall, broad-shouldered, with dark hair just beginning to silver at the temples and eyes that seemed to assess everything they touched. If you're enjoying this story, please subscribe and let us know in the comments where you're watching from. Now, let's continue with Eleanor's journey. Eleanor had been instructed to circulate with champagne, keeping glasses filled without drawing attention to herself. She had perfected this art over the years, becoming almost ghost-like in her movements. But as she approached a group near the eastern windows, her foot caught on the edge of an ornate rug. The tray tilted, and for one horrifying moment she thought she would spill champagne across the marble floor. She caught herself, steadying the tray with both hands, but in doing so, she looked up directly into Marcus Thornhill's eyes. It lasted less than a second. His gaze met hers with a curious intensity, as if he was seeing something unexpected. Then Eleanor quickly looked away, her heart hammering against her ribs. She moved past the group, setting down the tray on a side table with trembling hands. "You..." The voice was cold, sharp as winter ice. Eleanor turned to find Vivian Ashford standing mere feet away. The Luna's eyes had transformed from their earlier warmth into something predatory and dangerous. The conversations around them began to fade as other guests noticed the confrontation. "My lady, I apologize," Eleanor began. "You dare look at him?" Vivian's voice rose, carrying across the now silent ballroom. "You dare cast your eyes upon my mate?" Eleanor's mouth went dry. "I didn't mean to. It was an accident. I tripped and—" "Vivian, it was nothing," Marcus interjected, his tone reasonable. The girl nearly fell. She wasn't— "Do not defend her." Vivian whirled on him, her anger now directed at her mate. "I saw how she looked at you. I saw the recognition in her eyes." Eleanor felt the weight of every gaze in the room, pressing down on her. This was wrong, terribly wrong. She had done nothing but exist in the wrong place at the wrong time. "Please, Lady Ashford, I meant no disrespect. I would never—" "You will suffer for this," Vivian said, her voice dropping to a whisper that somehow carried more menace than her earlier shouts. She raised her hand, and Eleanor felt something shift in the air around her, a pressure that seemed to come from everywhere at once. "I curse you, Eleanor Hayes. May your blood carry the weight of your transgression. May your very existence serve as reminder of what happens to those who overstep their place." The room seemed to spin. Eleanor felt heat spreading through her veins, as if her blood had turned to liquid fire. She stumbled backward, gasping for breath. Several other servants rushed forward to catch her before she fell. "That's enough," Marcus said firmly, stepping between his mate and Eleanor. "This has gone too far." "Has it?" Vivienne's laugh was bitter. "You defend her even now. Perhaps my instincts were correct after all." Eleanor barely registered the argument that followed. The head housekeeper, Mrs. Pemberton, helped her out of the ballroom and down the servants' corridor to the small room Eleanor shared with two other maids. The older woman's face was creased with worry. "What were you thinking, child?" Mrs. Pemberton asked, helping Eleanor onto her narrow bed. "I wasn't thinking anything. I tripped. I didn't mean to look at him." Eleanor's voice came out weak, strained. The burning sensation in her blood was beginning to fade, replaced by a deep, bone-tired exhaustion. Mrs. Pemberton sighed heavily. "The Luna is powerful, Eleanor, and she's possessive of her mate. There have been stories about other women who've caught Marcus Thornhill's attention. None of them ended well. I didn't want his attention. I don't want any of this." Tears pricked at Eleanor's eyes. "What did she do to me?" "I don't know, child. But whatever it was, it's done now. We'll have to see what comes of it." Mrs. Pemberton squeezed her hand gently. "Get some rest. Things will look clearer in the morning." But things didn't look clearer in the morning. If anything, they became more complicated. Eleanor woke with a pounding headache and a strange heaviness in her limbs. When she looked in the small mirror above the wash basin, she saw that her eyes had changed. They had always been a light brown, unremarkable and plain. Now they held flecks of silver that seemed to shimmer in the early light. She reported for her duties, despite feeling unwell, knowing that missing work would only make her situation worse. The other servants kept their distance, whispering when they thought she couldn't hear. By midday, Eleanor was summoned to the estate manager's office. Mr. Whitmore was a stern man in his 50s who had worked for the Ashford family his entire adult life. He sat behind his desk, his expression carefully neutral. "Miss Hayes, there's been a complaint registered against you by Lady Ashford. Given the seriousness of the accusation and the disruption to last night's event, I have no choice but to terminate your employment." Eleanor had expected this, but hearing the words still felt like a physical blow. "I understand, sir. You'll be paid through the end of the week. You have until tomorrow evening to collect your belongings and vacate the premises." He slid an envelope across the desk. "Your final wages." Eleanor took the envelope with numb fingers. She had nowhere to go, no family to return to. The small amount of money would last a few weeks if she was careful, but then what? "Thank you, sir." As she left the office, she nearly collided with Marcus Thornhill in the hallway. He steadied her with a hand on her elbow, and she felt that same strange jolt of recognition she had experienced the night before. "Miss Hayes," he said quietly, "I'm sorry for what happened. Vivienne can be intense when she feels threatened." Eleanor pulled her arm away gently. "I threatened no one, Mr. Thornhill. I was simply doing my job. I know that. And for what it's worth, I spoke to Whitmore about reconsidering the termination." "But it stands anyway," Eleanor said, not bothering to keep the bitterness from her voice. Marcus looked uncomfortable, a crack in his usually composed demeanor. "Vivienne is my mate. I have to respect her wishes, even when I don't agree with them." "Of course you do." Eleanor stepped around him. "Excuse me, I have packing to do." She spent the rest of that day gathering her few possessions and trying to figure out where she would go. By evening, she had decided to return to Providence, though the prospect filled her with dread. The city held nothing but bad memories and worse opportunities, but at least it was familiar. That night, as Eleanor lay in her bed for the last time, she felt the strange heaviness in her blood intensify. It pulsed through her veins in waves, each surge bringing with it fragmented images that made no sense. She saw the Ashford estate burning, saw people running through smoke-filled corridors. She saw Marcus Thornhill on his knees, his face twisted in anguish. And she saw herself, standing in the center of it all, her hands covered in blood that glowed with an otherworldly silver light. Eleanor woke gasping, her nightgown soaked with sweat. Dawn was just breaking over the estate grounds. She dressed quickly, wanting to leave before the household fully woke. As she carried her single battered suitcase down the servants' stairs, she heard voices coming from the main drawing room. "Getting worse, Marcus. We can't ignore it anymore." The voice belonged to Jonathan Ashford, the patriarch of the family, and Vivian's father. "The curse has been on this land for 200 years. It's not getting worse, it's just—" "It is getting worse." Jonathan's voice rose. 3 members of the household have fallen ill this month alone. The livestock are dying. The crops in the southern fields have failed completely. Something has changed. Eleanor paused on the stairs, her curiosity overriding her desire to leave quickly. "What would you have me do?" Marcus asked. The prophecy was clear. Only blood spilled in sacrifice can break the curse, and we've tried everything we can think of. Perhaps we haven't tried the right blood. The silence that followed was heavy with implication. Eleanor's heart began to race. She knew she should keep moving, should get out of this place before she learned anything more, but her feet seemed rooted to the spot. "You're suggesting we kill someone," Marcus said finally, his voice flat. "I'm suggesting we consider all options. The curse demands blood. Perhaps it requires specific blood. Blood that holds power. Blood that has been marked." "No." Marcus's response was immediate and firm. "I won't be party to murder, Jonathan, curse or no curse." Eleanor forced herself to move, taking the remaining stairs as quietly as possible. She slipped out through the kitchen entrance, where the cook was just beginning breakfast preparations. The morning air was crisp and cold, promising the first real frost of the season. She had made it halfway down the long drive when she heard footsteps behind her. She turned to find Vivian Ashford approaching, wrapped in a thick wool coat against the chill. "Leaving so soon?" Vivian asked, though her tone suggested she knew exactly when Eleanor was leaving. "As instructed, my lady." Vivian studied her for a long moment. In the growing daylight, Eleanor could see that the Luna looked tired, with dark circles under her eyes and a tightness around her mouth that spoke of pain or worry. "The curse I placed on you," Vivian said abruptly. "Do you feel it?" Eleanor considered lying but decided against it. "Yes." "Good. It will follow you wherever you go, a constant reminder of your place in this world." Vivian stepped closer, and Eleanor caught the scent of expensive perfume mixed with something wilder, more primal. "But know this, the curse I gave you is nothing compared to the one that plagues these lands. You got off lightly." "Ah, why are you telling me this?" Vivian's expression shifted, becoming almost vulnerable for a moment. "Because curses have a way of binding people together in unexpected ways. Because the magic that runs through this estate is old and angry, and it doesn't care about our petty grievances. And because—" She paused, seeming to wrestle with something. "Because I saw something in your eyes last night, something that frightened me more than your looking at my mate." Before Eleanor could ask what she meant, Vivian turned and walked back toward the house, leaving Eleanor standing alone on the drive with more questions than answers. The bus to Providence didn't leave until noon, so Eleanor spent the morning in the small cafe in town, nursing a cup of coffee she could barely afford, and trying to make sense of everything that had happened. The curse Vivian had mentioned, not the one she had placed on Eleanor, but the older one affecting the estate, seemed to be at the center of everyone's concern. 200 years was a long time for any curse to hold, and if it truly was getting worse, that explained the desperation she had heard in Jonathan Ashford's voice. But what did any of it have to do with her? She was nobody, a servant who had been fired for an accidental glance. The smart thing to do would be to get on that bus and never look back. The strange heaviness in her blood pulsed again, stronger this time. The coffee cup rattled against its saucer, and Eleanor realized her hands were shaking. The silver flecks in her eyes seemed to glow in the cafe's dim lighting, drawing startled glances from the other patrons. Eleanor paid for her coffee and left quickly, walking aimlessly through the small town. She had been here dozens of times over the past 3 years, running errands for the estate, but she had never really looked at it. The buildings were old, some dating back to colonial times, and many showed signs of neglect. Paint peeled from window frames, roofs sagged under the weight of age, and several storefronts stood empty. She found herself in the town's small historical society, drawn by a display in the window about the founding families of the region. The elderly woman behind the desk looked up with interest as Eleanor entered. "Welcome, dear. Can I help you find something?" "I'm interested in the history of the Ashford estate," Eleanor said, surprising herself. The woman's expression brightened. "Oh, we have quite a bit on the Ashfords. They're one of our most prominent families, though there's a darker side to their history that most people don't know about." She led Eleanor to a back room filled with filing cabinets and old ledgers. From one drawer, she pulled out a leather-bound journal, its pages yellowed with age. "This belonged to Margaret Ashford, written in 1825, the woman explained. She documented the curse's beginning." Eleanor opened the journal carefully, her eyes scanning the neat handwriting. The story that emerged was both tragic and terrifying. In 1825, the Ashford family had been at the height of their power, controlling vast territories and wielding significant influence over the supernatural communities of New England. The then patriarch, William Ashford, had fallen in love with a servant girl named Sarah Winters. But William was already promised to another, a powerful Luna from a rival family. When the Luna discovered the affair, she demanded Sarah's death as punishment for the betrayal. William, bowing to political pressure, allowed Sarah to be executed. But before she died, Sarah, who possessed latent magical abilities she had never revealed, placed a curse on the Ashford bloodline and their lands. The curse was specific and cruel. The Ashford family would prosper materially, but suffer personally. Their mates would never truly be loyal, their children would know pain and loss, and the land itself would slowly die around them. The only way to break the curse was through the willing sacrifice of blood that held the same power as Sarah's, blood marked by both magic and injustice. Eleanor's hands trembled as she read. The parallels were impossible to ignore. She too was a servant girl who had drawn unwanted attention. She too had been marked by a Luna's anger. And Vivian's curse had done something to her blood, changed it in ways she didn't fully understand. "Are you all right, dear?" the woman asked, noticing Eleanor's pale face. Yes. Thank you for showing me this." Eleanor carefully closed the journal. She left the Historical Society in a daze, Margaret Ashford's words echoing in her mind. The bus to Providence left in 20 minutes, but Eleanor's feet carried her in the opposite direction, back toward the estate. She didn't fully understand why she was returning, only that the pull was undeniable. Something in her blood called to something in that cursed land, a resonance that grew stronger with each step. By the time she reached the estate gates, the sun was beginning to set, painting the sky in shades of amber and rose. The guard at the gate looked surprised to see her. "Miss Hayes, I thought you'd left." "I need to speak with Mr. Thornhill. It's urgent." The guard hesitated, then spoke into his radio. After a brief conversation, he nodded. "Mr. Thornhill will see you in the library. Go on in." Eleanor made her way through the familiar corridors, her heart pounding. The library was in the east wing, a massive room lined with books from floor to ceiling. Marcus Thornhill stood by the fireplace, his expression unreadable. "Miss Hayes, I didn't expect to see you again." "I know about the curse," Eleanor said without preamble. "The real curse, the one from 1825. Marcus's eyes widened slightly. "How? I went to the Historical Society. I read Margaret Ashford's journal. Eleanor took a deep breath. And I think I know why your father-in-law was talking about specific blood this morning. You overheard that conversation? I did, and I think he was talking about me. Marcus moved closer, his gaze searching her face. The curse Vivian placed on you has changed you somehow. I can see it in your eyes. The curse mixed with something that was already there, something I didn't know about. Eleanor had been piecing it together all afternoon, fragments of memories from her childhood that had never quite made sense. Her mother's strange abilities, the way she could sense things before they happened, the reason her father had left, calling her mother a witch. I have latent magical abilities like Sarah Winters did, and Vivian's curse awakened them. The library door opened, and Vivian herself entered, followed by Jonathan Ashford. They both stopped short at seeing Eleanor. "What is she doing here?" Vivian demanded. "She knows about the curse," Marcus said. "All of it." Jonathan's face went carefully blank. "I see. And what do you intend to do with this knowledge, Miss Hayes?" Eleanor looked at each of them in turn. Marcus with his conflicted loyalty, Vivian with her protective rage, Jonathan with his calculating desperation. The curse requires blood spilled in willing sacrifice. Blood marked by magic and injustice. That's what Sarah Winters's curse demanded, isn't it? "The prophecy is more specific than that," Jonathan said slowly. "It speaks of blood that mirrors the original sin, a servant marked by a Luna's curse, carrying magic in her veins, who chooses to give her life to break the cycle." "You're insane if you think we're going to kill her," Marcus said sharply. "No one is killing anyone," Eleanor said, her voice steadier than she felt. "But I'm curious about something. What happens if the curse isn't broken? How much worse can it get?" Vivian spoke for the first time since entering, her voice quiet. "It will consume everything. The land is already dying. Soon it will spread beyond the estate boundaries, affecting the town. Then the region. The supernatural communities are connected through old magic. If the curse on our land continues to grow, it could destabilize the entire network." Eleanor thought of the people in town, the empty storefronts, the general air of decline she had noticed that morning. How many were already being affected? How many would suffer if she walked away? "There has to be another way," Marcus insisted. "Some other interpretation of the prophecy." "We've been searching for 200 years, Jonathan said wearily. "Every generation has tried to find an alternative. None exists." Eleanor felt the weight of their collective despair pressing down on her. She was an outsider to their world, yet somehow she had become central to its survival. The irony wasn't lost on her. The servant cursed for looking at a Luna's mate might be the only one who could save them all. "I need time to think," she said finally. "And I need complete honesty from all of you about what the sacrifice would entail." Over the next few days, Eleanor learned more about the supernatural world than she had in 3 years of working at the estate. Marcus, clearly wrestling with guilt over the situation, became her primary teacher. He explained the intricate web of magic that connected the werewolf communities, the old bloodlines and ancient pacts that governed their society. The Ashford curse wasn't just a family problem, it was a structural threat to the entire system. Vivian kept her distance at first, but slowly began to unbend. One evening, she found Eleanor in the garden where Sarah Winters had reportedly been executed. "I owe you an apology," Vivian said abruptly. "My curse was born of jealousy and insecurity, not any real threat you posed." Eleanor looked at the Luna with new eyes. She saw not just the powerful, beautiful woman she had feared, but someone trapped by her own nature and circumstances. "You were protecting what was yours. I understand that." "Do you?" Vivienne sat on the stone bench beside Eleanor. Marcus and I were matched for political reasons. Our families needed the alliance. We've built a life together, even affection. But there's always been a distance between us. When I saw how he looked at you, even for that brief moment, I saw something I'd never seen in his eyes when he looked at me. Genuine interest, curiosity. It terrified me. I'm not interested in your mate, Lady Ashford. I know that now. But it doesn't change the fact that my curse awakened something in you that puts your life in danger. Vivienne's voice cracked slightly. Another innocent servant girl, destroyed by the Ashford family's dysfunction. The parallels to Sarah Winters are almost poetic in their cruelty. Eleanor considered this. Maybe that's the point. Maybe the curse requires us to see the parallels, to fully understand what was done to Sarah before it can be broken. You're considering the sacrifice. It wasn't a question. I'm considering all my options. But the truth was, Eleanor knew she had already made her decision. She had spent her whole life invisible, overlooked, a background character in other people's stories. Here was a chance to matter, to make a choice that would affect thousands of lives. The idea was both terrifying and exhilarating. The ritual would take place during the new moon, 3 weeks away. In that time, Eleanor insisted on learning everything she could about the magic involved. She worked with the estate's historian, an ancient werewolf named Thomas, who had served the Ashfords for over a century. He taught her about blood magic, about the power of willing sacrifice, about the thin line between curse and blessing. Magic is intent made manifest, Thomas explained one afternoon as they pored over old texts in the library. Sarah Winters didn't just curse the Ashfords out of spite. She was making a statement about power and justice. Her curse can only be broken by someone choosing what she was denied, the right to determine her own fate. But she chose to curse them, Eleanor pointed out. That was the only choice they left her. At the moment of her death, it was the only power she had. Thomas closed the book they had been reading. You have more choices than she did, Miss Hayes. Remember that. Eleanor knew he was right, but she also knew that every choice had consequences. If she walked away, the curse would continue to spread. If she stayed and didn't go through with the sacrifice, she would watch the situation deteriorate, knowing she could have prevented it. The only real choice was whether to accept her role in this drama willingly or with reluctance. As the days passed, Eleanor noticed changes in herself beyond the silver flecks in her eyes. She could sense emotions in others, feel the currents of magic that flowed through the estate. She began to have dreams, not nightmares, but visions of the past. She saw Sarah Winters as she had been, a bright, laughing girl with hopes and dreams. She saw William Ashford torn between duty and love. She saw the moment of Sarah's death, felt the rage and sorrow that had fueled her curse. Marcus found her one evening in the garden, tears streaming down her face. Another vision? Eleanor nodded, unable to speak. He sat beside her, and she leaned against his shoulder without thinking. They had developed an unexpected friendship over these weeks, built on honesty and mutual respect. You don't have to do this, he said quietly. We'll find another way. There is no other way. We both know that. Eleanor wiped her eyes. But I'm not doing it just because it's necessary. I'm doing it because I finally understand what Sarah was trying to teach your family. What's that? That every person matters. That a servant girl's life has the same value as a Luna's. That love and loyalty can't be commanded or controlled. They have to be freely given. Eleanor sat up, looking Marcus in the eye. Your family has spent 200 years trying to break this curse through magical loopholes or powerful spells, but the curse was never about magic. It was about recognizing the humanity you denied, Sarah. Marcus was quiet for a long moment. You're wiser than any of us deserve. I'm just someone who's spent her whole life watching from the sidelines. You see things differently from that perspective. The night before the ritual, Eleanor barely slept. She spent hours writing letters to Mrs. Pemberton, thanking her for her kindness, to the cook, who had always saved her extra portions, to the other servants who had been her quiet companions. She wanted to leave something behind, some record that she had existed and chosen this path deliberately. Near dawn, there was a knock on her door. She opened it to find Vivian standing there, looking as sleepless as Eleanor felt. "May I come in?" Eleanor stepped aside, and Vivian entered the small room that had been prepared for her in the family wing, a far cry from the servants' quarters where she had lived before. "I can't let you do this," Vivian said without preamble. "It's wrong. You're innocent in all of this, and asking you to sacrifice yourself for our family's sins is unconscionable." "You're not asking. I'm choosing." "Why?" Vivian's voice broke. "Why would you choose this?" Eleanor considered the question carefully. "Because for the first time in my life, I have the power to make a real difference. Because I've seen what Sarah Winters went through, and I refuse to let her death be meaningless. And because—" she paused, searching for the right words. "Because I've spent my whole life being invisible. This way, I matter. This way, my life means something." Vivian sank onto the edge of the bed, her composure finally cracking. "This isn't how it's supposed to be. You should have a long life ahead of you. Love, children, all the things I take for granted." "Maybe," Eleanor said gently, "or maybe this is exactly what my life was supposed to be. Maybe everything that happened, my mother's magic, my father leaving, me ending up at this estate, even your curse, was leading to this moment. I don't believe in fate, neither did I, but I believe in choice, and this is mine." The ritual was set for midnight in the garden where Sarah had died. As the hour approached, Eleanor dressed in a simple white gown that had been prepared for her. She wore no jewelry, no adornment. Thomas had explained that the ritual required purity of purpose, a willing participant unencumbered by worldly attachments. The garden had been prepared with candles forming a circle around the stone altar at its center. The entire Ashford family was present, along with representatives from other supernatural communities who had come to witness the breaking of the curse. Eleanor walked through the assembled crowd, feeling their eyes on her, but no longer caring about their judgment. Marcus, Vivian, and Jonathan waited at the altar. Marcus's face was drawn, conflicted. Vivian had been crying, her eyes red and swollen. Jonathan looked grave but resigned. "Are you certain about this?" Jonathan asked formally, loud enough for all to hear. "I am," Eleanor replied, her voice clear and steady. "And you understand the sacrifice required?" "I do." Thomas stepped forward with an ancient dagger, its blade etched with symbols Eleanor had learned to read over the past weeks. They spoke of endings and beginnings, of blood and redemption, of curses transformed into blessings. "The ritual requires 3 cuts," Thomas explained, though Eleanor already knew this. "One for the curse placed upon you, one for the curse upon this land, and one for the choice you make freely." Eleanor held out her right hand, palm up. Thomas made the first cut across her palm, and her blood welled up, glowing with that strange silver light she had seen in her visions. She didn't flinch. "For the curse of the Luna," Thomas intoned. The second cut mirrored the first on her left palm. The pain was sharp, but not unbearable. "For the curse of the land." Eleanor took the dagger from Thomas's hands, surprising everyone. "The third cut must be made by my own hand," she said. "That's the point, isn't it? Choice, free will, the thing Sarah was denied." She pressed the blade against her forearm, but before she could make the final cut, Marcus grabbed her wrist. "Wait, there has to be another way. Eleanor, please." She looked at him with compassion. "This is the way, trust me. I can't watch you die." "Then don't think of it as death. Think of it as transformation. Eleanor gently removed his hand from her wrist. Sarah's curse was born of rage and injustice. My blood will be given freely with forgiveness and hope. That's what breaks the pattern. She made the third cut, deeper than the first two, and her blood flowed freely onto the stone altar. The silver glow intensified, spreading across the stone and into the ground beneath. Eleanor felt her strength beginning to fade, but she also felt something else, a sense of rightness, of completion. The ground beneath them began to tremble. The candles flickered wildly, and a wind rose from nowhere, whipping through the garden. Eleanor fell to her knees, her vision beginning to blur. But then something unexpected happened. The blood on the altar began to rise, forming shapes in the air. Eleanor saw Sarah Winters standing before her, no longer the angry, dying girl from her visions, but a woman at peace. You understood. Sarah's voice seemed to come from everywhere and nowhere. You saw what they could not. The curse was never about revenge. It was about recognition, about value, about choice. I know, Eleanor whispered. Then know this. Your blood breaks the curse, but it need not take your life. You give freely what I could not give. That is sacrifice enough. The silver light exploded outward, washing over everyone present. Eleanor felt herself falling, but strong arms caught her. She looked up to see Marcus holding her, his face transformed with relief and wonder. You're alive, he breathed. I'm alive, Eleanor confirmed, though she felt fundamentally changed in ways she couldn't yet comprehend. The transformation in the garden was immediately visible. Plants that had been withering began to straighten and bloom. The air itself felt lighter, cleaner, and Eleanor could feel the curse lifting, not just from the land, but from the people gathered there. Generations of accumulated pain and dysfunction began to dissolve like morning fog. Over the following weeks, the changes became more pronounced. The estate's crops flourished, the sick recovered, the town beyond the estate boundaries showed signs of renewal. Eleanor, meanwhile, discovered that Sarah's final act had granted her something unexpected, a place in this world she had only observed from the margins. Her magical abilities had been fully awakened by the ritual, but they were different from what others possessed. Where werewolves had strength and Lunas had authority, Eleanor had understanding. She could sense the connections between people, could see the patterns that drove behavior, could heal emotional wounds as easily as others healed physical ones. Marcus and Vivian's relationship underwent its own transformation. The curse had been maintaining artificial barriers between them, preventing genuine intimacy. With it gone, they began to build something real, not the political alliance they had started with, but an actual partnership based on honesty and mutual respect. Vivian came to Eleanor one afternoon, months after the ritual. They had developed a careful friendship, built on shared experience and mutual growth. I wanted to thank you, Vivian said, not just for breaking the curse, but for showing me what real strength looks like. I showed you nothing you didn't already have in you, Eleanor replied. You showed me that power isn't about control or possession. It's about choice and sacrifice and love freely given. Vivian smiled. Marcus and I are expecting a child, the first Ashford child born free of the curse in 200 years. Eleanor felt tears spring to her eyes. That's wonderful. We'd like to name her Sarah Eleanor, if you'll permit it. A reminder of what was lost and what was saved. I'd be honored. As Eleanor watched Vivian leave, she reflected on the strange journey that had brought her to this moment. She had been invisible, overlooked, a servant girl with no prospects. Now she was a recognized member of the supernatural community, her abilities valued and her insights sought. She had found purpose and belonging in the last place she expected, but more than that, She had learned that curses and blessings were often two sides of the same coin. Sarah Winters's curse had caused immense suffering, but it had also created the conditions for profound transformation. Vivian's curse had awakened Eleanor's abilities and set her on this path. And Eleanor's sacrifice, though it had not cost her life, had fundamentally altered who she was and what she could become. The estate thrived under a new era of transparency and justice. Jonathan Ashford, humbled by how close they had come to disaster, restructured how servants and staff were treated, giving them voice and agency they had never possessed before. The supernatural community took note, and slowly other families began to implement similar changes. Eleanor established a school for those with latent magical abilities, teaching them to understand and control their gifts. Many of her students were servants or working-class individuals who had never been given the opportunity to develop their potential. She became known as a teacher, healer, and mediator, someone who could bridge the gaps between different communities and perspectives. Marcus visited her classroom one day, watching her work with a young girl who was struggling to contain her emerging abilities. "You've created something remarkable here," he said when the lesson ended. "I'm just passing on what I learned, that everyone has value, that power comes in many forms, that the greatest magic is often the quietest." Eleanor smiled. "Lessons I wish I'd learned earlier in life. You've changed this entire community, Eleanor. You've changed me. We changed each other. That's how it works." As years passed, the story of the servant who broke the curse became legend, told and retold in supernatural communities across the country. Some versions emphasize the sacrifice, others the magic, still others the political changes that followed. But Eleanor knew the truth was simpler and more profound than any legend could capture. She had been given a choice, the same choice Sarah Winters had been denied. And in choosing freely, with full understanding of the cost and consequences, she had transformed not just a curse, but an entire system of power and privilege. She had shown that the weakest could become the strongest, that servants could teach Luna's wisdom, that love freely given was more powerful than any magic. The silver flecks in her eyes remained, a permanent reminder of Vivian's curse and its unexpected consequences. But Eleanor no longer saw them as a mark of shame or punishment. They were a symbol of transformation, of the moment she had stopped being invisible and claimed her place in the world. On the anniversary of the ritual, Eleanor always visited the garden. She would sit by the altar, now covered in blooming vines and flowers, and remember both Sarah Winters and the girl she herself had been. Two servants separated by 2 centuries, connected by blood and magic and the power of choice. "Thank you," she would whisper, to Sarah and to the universe that had brought her to this strange and wonderful place. "Thank you for showing me that even the smallest life can change everything." And in the rustling of the leaves and the gentle wind that always seemed to answer her, Eleanor felt the confirmation she sought. She mattered. She had always mattered, and that truth, more than any magic, more than any curse, was the real transformation. The kingdom built on the labor of invisible servants had learned to see. The Luna who cursed in jealousy had learned compassion, and the servant whose blood broke the curse had learned that her life was never small or insignificant. It was exactly the right size to change the world. 5 years had passed since the ritual, and Eleanor Hayes had built a life she never imagined possible. The school she had founded now occupied an entire wing of the Ashford estate, with over 40 students ranging from children to adults, all learning to harness magical abilities that had been dormant or suppressed. The morning sun streamed through tall windows as Eleanor moved between workstations, offering guidance and encouragement. A young woman named Cassidy was struggling with a levitation exercise, her frustration evident in the tense set of her shoulders. Eleanor placed a gentle hand on her arm, immediately sensing the blockage in her energy flow. "You're trying too hard," Eleanor said softly. "Magic isn't about force, it's about connection and intention." "But I've been practicing for weeks," Cassidy protested. "Everyone else can do this." "Everyone else isn't you! Your magic works differently, and that's not a weakness. It's simply your truth." Eleanor smiled. "Tell me, what do you feel when you try to lift the object?" Cassidy closed her eyes, considering. "Resistance, like there's a wall between me and the magic. That wall is fear. Fear of failure, fear of being different, fear of your own power." Eleanor's voice was knowing, born of her own experience. "I spent years making myself invisible because I was afraid of being seen. That fear created barriers I didn't even know existed. How did you break through them?" Eleanor thought back to that night in the garden, the moment she had chosen to step forward instead of disappearing into the background. "I accepted that being seen meant being vulnerable, and I decided that was acceptable, that I was acceptable exactly as I was." Cassidy opened her eyes, and Eleanor saw something shift in her expression. When the young woman tried the exercise again, the small stone on the table before her rose smoothly into the air. "I did it!" Cassidy's face broke into a radiant smile. Eleanor felt the familiar warmth of satisfaction that came from helping others discover their potential. This was why she taught, why she poured herself into this work. Every student who learned to embrace their abilities was a small rebellion against the old systems that had kept people like them powerless and overlooked. After classes ended, Eleanor walked through the estate grounds, noting the continued transformation of the landscape. The gardens flourished in ways they hadn't for generations. The forests that bordered the property teemed with wildlife. Even the air felt different, cleaner, more vital. Breaking the curse had allowed the land itself to heal, and that healing continued to ripple outward. She found Vivian in the nursery, rocking little Sarah Eleanor, who had just turned 4. The child had inherited her mother's auburn hair and her father's dark eyes, but there was something else in her. A brightness, a joy that seemed to light up every room she entered. She was the first Ashford born completely free of the curse's influence, and it showed. "Aunt Eleanor!" the child cried, wriggling out of her mother's arms to run to Eleanor. Eleanor caught her up in a hug, marveling at how much she had grown. "Hello, little one. Have you been good for your mother today?" "Mostly good," Vivian said with a wry smile. "She turned all the flowers in my office blue this morning." "Did you mean to do that?" Eleanor asked the child. Sarah Eleanor nodded enthusiastically. "Blue is prettier than pink." "Well, you're not wrong," Eleanor laughed. "But we've talked about asking permission before we use magic, remember?" The child's face fell. "I forgot." "That's all right. But next time, what should you do?" "Ask first," Sarah Eleanor said solemnly. Vivian shook her head with affection. "She has more raw power at 4 than I did at 14. I don't know whether to be proud or terrified." "Both is acceptable," Eleanor said, setting the child down. "Power without the curse's corruption is a beautiful thing, but it still needs guidance. Which is why I'm grateful she has you as a teacher and a role model." Vivian's expression grew serious. "Actually, I wanted to talk to you about something. There's been a development." They sent Sarah Eleanor off to play with her nanny and moved to Vivian's private sitting room. Once they were settled, Vivian pulled out a letter bearing an unfamiliar seal. "This arrived this morning from the Blackwood Pack in Oregon. They've been dealing with a situation similar to what we faced, an old curse affecting their lands and people. They've heard the stories about what happened here, and they're asking for help." Eleanor took the letter, scanning its contents. The parallels were indeed striking. A curse born of injustice, land that was dying, a community in crisis. What kind of help are they seeking? They want you to come to Oregon and consult with them. They think you might be able to see something they've missed, given your unique perspective and abilities. Eleanor's first instinct was to refuse. She had built a life here, had students who depended on her, a community that had finally accepted her. The thought of leaving, even temporarily, filled her with anxiety. But then she remembered how isolated she had felt before the ritual, how desperately she had needed someone to see her and understand. If she could offer that to others, didn't she have an obligation to try? "How long would they need me?" Eleanor asked. "They're suggesting a month initially, with the possibility of extending if necessary. I know it's a lot to ask, and your students can be taught by the assistant instructors I've been training," Eleanor finished. "That's why I've been preparing them, isn't it? So the school doesn't depend entirely on me." Vivian studied her carefully. "You don't have to do this. You've already given so much." "Maybe that's exactly why I should go. Because I know what it's like to live under a curse, to feel hopeless and trapped." Eleanor folded the letter carefully. "When would they need me to arrive?" "Within the next 2 weeks, if possible." Eleanor spent the next few days preparing for her departure. She met with each of her students individually, ensuring they understood their assignments and knew they could write to her with questions. She briefed her assistant instructors on challenging cases and ongoing concerns, and she tried not to think too hard about how much this journey frightened her. Marcus found her in the library the night before she was scheduled to leave, surrounded by books about different types of curses and their remedies. "Burning the midnight oil?" he asked, settling into the chair across from her. "Trying to prepare for every possibility. I have no idea what I'll be walking into. You walked into an impossible situation here and transformed it completely. I have faith you'll do the same in Oregon." Marcus paused, seeming to choose his words carefully. "I wanted to thank you before you go, for everything you've done for our family, for this community. You've given us all a second chance." Eleanor felt her cheeks warm at the praise. "I only did what needed to be done. You did far more than that, and you know it. You showed us how to be better, how to value people for who they are rather than what they can offer us politically or socially." He leaned forward, his expression earnest. "The supernatural world is watching what's happened here. Other communities are starting to question their own hierarchies, their own treatment of servants and lower status members. You've started a movement, Eleanor, whether you intended to or not. That's a terrifying thought." Marcus laughed. "Welcome to having influence. It's uncomfortable at first, but you get used to it." They talked long into the night about the changes they'd witnessed over the past 5 years and the challenges that still remained. Despite all the progress, there were still those who resisted change, who clung to the old ways of doing things. There were other families with their own curses, their own cycles of abuse and injustice that they defended as tradition. "Sometimes I wonder if one curse breaking is enough," Eleanor admitted. "There are so many systems that need to change, so many wounds that need healing." "You can't heal everything," Marcus said gently, "but you can heal what's in front of you, and by doing that, you inspire others to do the same. Ripples, Eleanor. You're creating ripples that will spread farther than you can imagine." The journey to Oregon took 2 days by car, giving Eleanor time to process her anxiety and prepare mentally for what lay ahead. She had never traveled so far from Massachusetts, had rarely left the estate grounds in the years since the ritual. The world felt both larger and smaller than she remembered, full of possibility but also overwhelming in its complexity. The Blackwood Pack's territory was in the Cascade Mountains, a landscape of towering pines and rushing rivers that took Eleanor's breath away. She was met at the border by a young man named Ethan Blackwood, who introduced himself as the Alpha's nephew. "Thank you for coming. Ethan said as he loaded her bags into his truck. "We've been dealing with this curse for over a century, and it's getting worse. My uncle is, well, he's desperate." "Tell me about the curse," Eleanor said as they drove deeper into the territory. Ethan's hands tightened on the steering wheel. "It started in 1912 when my great-great-grandfather fell in love with a human woman named Catherine Reeves. But Catherine was already engaged to another man in town, and when my ancestor pursued her anyway, it caused a scandal. Catherine's fiancé confronted him, and in the ensuing fight, my great-great-grandfather killed him." Eleanor felt a chill run down her spine. "And Catherine cursed your family?" "Not Catherine. Her younger sister, Margaret, who was a witch. She cursed the Blackwood bloodline, declaring that we would never know true love, that our mates would always be divided from us by violence or circumstance. And she was right. Every alpha for 4 generations has either lost their mate to death, betrayal, or separation. Now, what happened to Catherine?" Ethan's expression darkened. "She married my great-great-grandfather anyway, but she was miserable for the rest of her life. The curse affected her too, made her unable to fully bond with him. She died young, broken by the weight of what her love had cost." They arrived at the pack house as the sun was setting, painting the sky in shades of orange and purple. The building was large and rustic, built from logs and stone, with windows that glowed warmly against the gathering darkness. But Eleanor could feel the curse as soon as she stepped onto the property, a heavy, oppressive energy that made the air feel thick and hard to breathe. Alpha Thomas Blackwood was a man in his 50s, with grey streaking through his dark hair and eyes that held decades of sorrow. He greeted Eleanor with grave courtesy, clearly uncertain what to expect from her. "Miss Hayes, thank you for making this journey. I won't pretend I'm not skeptical. We've tried everything to break this curse, and nothing has worked. But Vivian Ashford speaks highly of you, and at this point, I'm willing to try anything." "I can't promise I'll succeed," Eleanor said honestly, "but I'll do everything I can to help." Over the next few days, Eleanor immersed herself in the Blackwood family's history. She interviewed pack members, examined old journals and letters, and spent hours in meditation, trying to understand the curse's nature. What she discovered was both similar to and different from what had happened with the Ashfords. Like Sarah Winters, Margaret Reeves had cursed out of grief and rage over injustice. But where Sarah's curse had been about recognition and value, Margaret's was about consequences and accountability. She had wanted the Blackwoods to understand the pain they had caused, to feel the same division and loss that her sister had experienced. Eleanor shared her findings with Alpha Thomas one evening as they sat in his study. "The curse isn't just about punishment," she explained. "It's about forcing your family to confront what was done. Your great-great-grandfather took a life and destroyed multiple futures because he couldn't accept that Catherine wasn't his to claim. Margaret made sure his descendants would feel the cost of that choice." Thomas rubbed his temples wearily. "So how do we break it? Do we need another sacrifice?" "I don't think so. Every curse has its own logic, its own key. The Ashford curse required willing sacrifice because Sarah had been denied choice. Your curse is different. It's about accountability and understanding. We've acknowledged what was done. We've apologized to Catherine's descendants, made reparations. Nothing has changed." Eleanor considered this. "Acknowledgement isn't the same as understanding. Has anyone in your family truly grappled with why your ancestor did what he did? Has anyone examined the beliefs and systems that made him think he had the right to take what he wanted? Consequences be damned." Thomas looked uncomfortable. "We've discussed it. But have you changed? Has the pack culture shifted to prevent something similar from happening again?" The silence that followed was answer enough. Eleanor spent the next 2 weeks working with the pack's leadership, facilitating difficult conversations about power, consent, and entitlement. She discovered patterns of behavior that had persisted for generations, the assumption that alphas could claim whoever they wanted, that strength gave certain privileges, that human lives mattered less than werewolf desires. Many pack members resisted these conversations. They saw Eleanor as an outsider, trying to impose foreign values on their traditions. But others, particularly younger members and those who had suffered under the curse, embraced the opportunity for change. Ethan became one of Eleanor's strongest allies, using his position within the family to challenge his uncle and the other elders. "We can't keep doing things the same way and expect different results," he argued during one particularly heated pack meeting. "The curse exists because we refuse to change. Maybe that's the whole point. Maybe we're supposed to break ourselves before we can break the curse." His words struck a chord with Eleanor. That was exactly what had happened with the Ashfords. They had to fundamentally transform their relationship with power before the curse could be lifted. Perhaps the Blackwoods needed to undergo a similar metamorphosis. She suggested creating a new pack law, one that explicitly prohibited forcing any relationship and established clear consequences for abuse of power. The proposal met fierce resistance from traditionalists who saw it as weakening the alpha's authority. "Authority without accountability is tyranny," Eleanor said during the debate. "Your ancestor exercised that kind of authority, and look where it got you. 4 generations of suffering because one man thought his desires mattered more than another person's life." Alpha Thomas had been quiet throughout most of the discussion, but now he spoke. "Miss Hayes is right. I've watched this curse destroy my family for my entire life. My father lost his mate to illness when I was 10. I lost mine to a car accident before we could even complete the bonding. My son—" His voice broke. "My son won't even pursue a relationship because he's terrified of what the curse will take from him. This has to end." The new law passed by a narrow margin, but Eleanor knew that legislation alone wouldn't break the curse. There needed to be genuine transformation in how the pack understood and wielded power. She worked with Ethan and other younger pack members to create education programs about consent and healthy relationships. She helped establish a council that included voices from all levels of the pack hierarchy, not just the most powerful. And she pushed everyone to examine their own beliefs and behaviors, to root out the entitlement and assumptions that had allowed the original injustice to occur. It was exhausting work, and there were moments when Eleanor wanted to give up, to declare the situation hopeless and return to Massachusetts. But then she would remember her own transformation, how terrifying and necessary it had been, and she would find the strength to continue. 6 weeks into her stay, something shifted. Eleanor woke one morning to find the oppressive weight of the curse had lessened slightly. It was still there, but diminished, as if acknowledging the pack's efforts. She mentioned this to Alpha Thomas, who had noticed the same thing. "Is it breaking?" he asked, hope evident in his voice. "It's softening, responding to the changes you're making. But I don't think it will fully break until there's a concrete demonstration of the new values." "What kind of demonstration?" Eleanor thought about this carefully. "The curse was created because your ancestor prioritized his desires over someone else's autonomy and life. To break it, someone in your family needs to make the opposite choice, to prioritize another person's well-being over their own desires, even when it costs them something significant." As if in answer to her words, a crisis emerged the following week. A young woman from the nearby town had wandered onto pack territory, injured and disoriented. She had been hiking and fallen, breaking her leg and getting lost in the dense forest. The pack found her and brought her to the pack house for treatment. Her name was Jennifer Moss, and as the pack doctor tended to her injuries, it became clear that Ethan was drawn to her. Eleanor, with her empathic abilities, could sense the connection forming between them, not a supernatural mate bond, but genuine human attraction and compatibility. But Jennifer was engaged to be married to a man back in town, a wedding planned for 2 months away. Under the old ways, Ethan might have pursued her anyway, might have used his supernatural abilities to convince her to stay. Eleanor could see him wrestling with that temptation. She found him sitting outside the room where Jennifer was resting, his head in his hands. "I can feel it," he said without looking up, "the pull toward her. Everything in me is saying to fight for her, to make her see that we'd be perfect together." "But," Eleanor prompted gently, "but she's not mine to claim. She has a life, a fiancé she loves, plans and dreams that don't include me. And even though it's killing me, I know the right thing to do is let her go." He finally looked at Eleanor, his eyes bright with unshed tears. "This is the test, isn't it? This is what will break the curse." "I think it might be." When Jennifer was well enough to travel, Ethan arranged for her to be driven back to town safely. He spoke with her honestly about his attraction, but made it clear he respected her choices and her relationship. Jennifer was kind but firm. She loved her fiancé and was looking forward to her wedding. Eleanor watched Ethan say goodbye, saw the pain it cost him to choose Jennifer's autonomy over his own desires, and she felt the curse shatter like glass. The oppressive energy that had hung over the territory for over a century, suddenly lifting and dispersing into nothing. The change was immediate and dramatic. Pack members who had been ill began to recover. Relationships that had been strained by the curse's influence found new ease and joy. And Alpha Thomas, who had lived alone for decades, met a woman at a pack gathering the following week and felt the stirrings of a genuine mate bond for the first time in his life. "You did it," Thomas said to Eleanor as they stood on the pack house porch, watching the celebration that had spontaneously erupted. "You broke a century-old curse." "Ethan did it," Eleanor corrected. "I just helped you all see what needed to change." "You did more than that. You gave us a framework for understanding ourselves differently. You challenged us to be better." Thomas smiled. "The Ashfords were right to send you." Eleanor returned to Massachusetts a month later, carrying with her the knowledge that the work she had started at the Ashford estate could extend far beyond its boundaries. She had proven that curses could be broken not through magical loopholes or powerful spells, but through genuine transformation and moral courage. Her students welcomed her back with enthusiasm, eager to hear about her adventures. Eleanor found herself energized by the experience, seeing new possibilities for how she could serve the broader supernatural community. Vivienne was waiting for her in the library when she arrived back at the estate. "I heard about what happened in Oregon. The whole supernatural world is talking about it." I hope that's a good thing," Eleanor said with a tired smile. "It's a very good thing. You've proven that the methods that worked here can work elsewhere. You've given hope to communities that have been living under curses for generations." Vivienne handed her a stack of letters. "These arrived while you were gone. Requests for help from packs and covens all over the country." Eleanor looked at the letters, feeling both daunted and exhilarated. "I can't help everyone." "No, but you can help some, and you can teach others to do what you do, to see the patterns, to understand what curses really are and what they're trying to teach us." Vivian's expression grew thoughtful. "What if you expanded the school, made it not just about magical abilities, but about this kind of work, curse breaking through transformation and justice?" The idea took root in Eleanor's mind immediately. She could train others to do what she had done in Oregon, could create a network of people dedicated to healing old wounds and breaking destructive cycles. It would be challenging work, but it felt right in a way few things had since the ritual. Over the following months, Eleanor restructured her school, adding new courses on curse analysis, conflict resolution, and transformative justice. She brought in guest speakers from various supernatural communities, people who had their own experiences with curses and healing. The school's reputation grew, attracting students from across the country and eventually from around the world. Ethan Blackwood was one of her first students in the new program, eager to learn how to apply what he had experienced to help others. He proved to be a natural, his own transformation giving him insight and empathy that complemented Eleanor's teaching perfectly. 3 years after her trip to Oregon, Eleanor's school had become a center for supernatural healing and transformation, a place where old curses were studied not as magical curiosities, but as symptoms of deeper injustices that needed to be addressed. The work was never easy. People resisted change, clung to traditions even when those traditions caused harm, defended power structures that benefited them at others' expense. But slowly, steadily, the ripples spread. Communities that had been fractured by ancient curses found healing. Power hierarchies that had gone unchallenged for centuries began to shift, and servants, outcasts, and marginalized individuals discovered their voices and their value. Eleanor stood before a new class of students on a crisp autumn morning, looking at the diverse group assembled before her. There were werewolves and witches, humans with latent abilities, and supernatural beings who had been outcasts from their own communities. Each carried their own wounds and wisdom, their own potential to transform themselves and the world around them. "Curses are teachers," Eleanor began, the opening to every course she taught. "They show us where we've failed, where we've allowed injustice to take root and flourish. Breaking them requires more than magic. It requires courage, honesty, and the willingness to change fundamentally who we are and how we move through the world." She looked at each student, seeing not just who they were, but who they could become. "You're here because you believe things can be different, that old wounds can heal, that destructive patterns can be broken. You're right. But the work starts with you, with examining your own beliefs and behaviors, with choosing transformation over comfort." As she launched into the day's lesson, Eleanor felt the familiar sense of purpose that had guided her since that night in the garden, when she had chosen to step forward instead of remaining invisible. She was still choosing that path every day, choosing to be seen, to matter, to use her abilities and insights to create change. The servant girl who had been cursed for looking at a Luna's mate had become a teacher, a healer, a force for transformation in the supernatural world. Her blood hadn't just broken one curse. It had started a movement that continued to grow, touching lives and communities she would never personally meet. And in quiet moments, when Eleanor walked through the gardens where Sarah Winters had died and where Eleanor herself had been reborn, she felt the presence of all those who had been overlooked, dismissed, and denied their power. She carried them with her, honored them through her work, and ensured that their struggles had meaning. The silver flecks in her eyes caught the fading sunlight as she stood among the blooming flowers, a permanent reminder that curses and blessings were often inseparable, that the worst moments could become the seeds of the greatest transformations. Eleanor Hayes had been cursed, had bled, had been transformed, and in transforming, she had learned the greatest truth of all, that the power to change the world had been inside her all along, waiting for the moment she chose to claim it.